I think we're at time. I'll go ahead and get it going here. So this session is building modular, maintainable, recipe-based site templates. Who has experience with recipes or site templates in the room? And of that experience, is it a little, a lot? You built a lot of them? Poco?
Little.
Okay.
Little recipes.
Cool. It's good, because I didn't know, how deep to go into some of that. It's been a topic at this camp for a while. There's always usually a recipe session. I'm Andy Giles. I started off building websites in early 2000 for a company, and then kind of became a sysadmin, and then wanted to focus on software development and building Drupal sites. So I started a Drupal company in 2012. And then since then, I've kind of gone back into a little DevOps, sysadmin, site building. I like all of it, so I have a hard time picking one. But got about 15 years experience in Drupal. Andy G 5000 on Drupal.org. If you've seen me in the mostly in the contrib space around Drupal commerce. Been coming here since 2013, I believe. So a lot of Florida Drupal camps in my belt. And then last year, at this camp, we kind of started talking about it, and since then we've actually launched a new company called DripYard. We make premium Drupal themes. We follow Drupal best practices. They're accessible. They support Canvas out of the box, and that's kind of what this session is. It's not an advertising session, but it is how we built our stack, how we built our recipes, because there's a couple different ways to approach building a site template. There's an easy way, and then there's more modular, granular way, and we'll go through both of those. So we'll talk about how or where we started in Drupal. So where did recipes come from? What's the history? Where are we now? What is a recipe? How do you build a recipe? What is a site template? And then it'll be a really informal demo where I'll go through installing a site template, showing you that stuff, and then just interactive. If you guys have questions, we'll go through them. So where do we start with all this? So in Drupal 5, they rolled out install profiles. And this was something that would allow you to configure your site, but it would only run during the installation. You couldn't run it after to manipulate the site. So initial configuration during install. In Drupal 6, the standard profile came to be, and it kind of paved the way for distributions to be written for Drupal. So there was Open Atrium, Panoply, Pressflow, a lot of those types of things. I think a lot of you have been around long enough to remember those days. And then in Drupal 7, of course, features. Has anybody used features in the past? Yes. FU all, of course, is the famous drush command. And the guy that wrote that is here, James Sainsbury. So tell him thank you if you see him. But it allowed you to, it was kind of like the precursor to recipes as a whole, because you could configure your fields, your content types, your views. It did all the stuff that we're doing in config management now, but in their own serialized PHP way. And then in Drupal 8, of course, the config management system came. How many of you are familiar with config and all that? Cool. So yeah, this is the biggest thing that allowed recipes, was that now the entire site configuration is YAML based. There's checks to make sure that it's applied properly. There's, when you apply them, it takes a snapshot, tries to apply the configuration, and then if it fails, goes back to the snapshot. So that whole system is kind of what allows the recipe ecosystem to work. And then in Drupal 10.3, we've got recipes. So where are we now? So all installation and configuration tools are recipe-based. So if you install Drupal core and standard profile, it's invoking core recipes. So you can go into the folders of core, into the recipe folder, and actually see how they're doing it. You can also extend those if you have your own recipe that you want to, say, use the media, the media bundles that come with core, and you don't want to install maybe the whole standard profile, you just want to use those. You can point your recipe to those to extend them to make sure that it gets installed and set up without having to reinvent the wheel. We've got Drupal CMS 2.0, which was released a couple weeks ago. Has anybody used that yet? Nobody? Have you seen it? Bob has. Yeah, cool. So Drupal CMS 1, if you don't know, came out, and they're trying to make Drupal more approachable, less having to be a Drupal developer to get it set up and running. CMS 1 was the first phase of that, and it was based on Layout Builder and a lot of contrib modules that are well supported, having those installed, and just kind of giving you a project out of the box that was a little more than core. Most of the modules that you would want to install anyways. 2.0 came out to pair with Drupal Canvas, which is the page builder for Drupal, which I'll show some demos of later as well. Yeah, and then Drupal CMS Helper is a tool that we can use to build site templates. So kind of the preferred way to build site templates for Drupal now is to start with CMS 2.0, use their tools, you basically build the site and then export it, and we'll go over how to do that as well. So we've got site templates. Byte is the first site template that's kind of like supported by the community. It's available on Drupal.org. Kind of targets a SaaS business, but if you install CMS, you have the option to install like a vanilla one or the Byte template, and we'll see that as well. And then coming soon, I've heard there's a site template marketplace where you'll be able to go, sponsored by the Drupal Association, you'll be able to go browse templates, and some will be free, some will be paid, but you can purchase a fully built site template. All right, so what is a recipe? So a recipe really is just it's like your config management directory, but it's a smaller subset of config that's specific to what you want in that recipe. In addition to those config files, there's config actions, which now allow you to manipulate the configuration of the site. So if there's something that's like already installed and you want to change the configuration of it, you can use a config action to do so. You can have dependencies in a recipe, so basically a composer.json file that ships with your recipe that says these things need to be available when applying the recipe. And the really cool thing is default content. So one of the hardest things I've had to like ship a site is, you've got like the site content, but sometimes you just want default content that's on every install of that site. And that allows you to do that. You just basically export it to YAML and include it in your recipe. And then you've got things like taxonomy terms or entities, nodes, things that you want to ship with your recipe will come that way. So if we look at how to build a recipe, so the main part of it is the recipe.yaml. And this is just a simple configuration file, similar to like a module.info. But you've got the name of your recipe, the type, description. This is install, where you specify what modules you want to install as part of your recipe. And you can put your config and config actions in this section. And then strict is if you want to like make sure that the recipe is 100% applied and doesn't conflict with anything that's already on the site. So a lot of times you'll see strict false, which will just like attempt to put the configuration in place, and if it has a conflict with something that's already there, it'll just assume that it's okay and skip it. And then you can also extend other recipes, and that's kind of what we've done with DripYard, is built a whole bunch of recipes, and then they all stack on top of each other to make kind of a site template. So we'll get into that. If you get into the recipe folder, so you've got your YAML file that we just talked about, and then you've got your configuration. This is the same thing, like I said, as a Drupal site config. All the YAML files that you would export with a config export. And then the default content folder would contain something like this. So you'd have the entity type, so block content, node, file, media, menu link. Yeah, that's the core menu entity type. And then within that, you would have what gets generated when you run content export. And so you don't really need to write this. You use tools to create all of these files within. And you can see here I've got the block content, the footer logo that gets exposed in the footer, and it's basically just like a body field with an image in it. So pretty simple example of some default content. So what is a site template? Well, a site template is just a recipe. It can be one recipe, it can be multiple recipes. If you have your whisks, you can make all the recipes you need. But yeah, so one recipe, one or more recipes representing a complete Drupal site. And kind of the goal of a site template is to get you 90% of the way there. You install a site template and make a little branding change, edit the content, and then you have a fully built Drupal site, which is something that traditionally has taken a long time to do. So I mentioned this Byte is the first template, and yeah, so all these things just give you the kickstart to set up sites. So what are the use cases? If you run an agency and you have a consistent requirement for all of your projects, building recipes is a good idea because when you install it, then that all the setup time that your developers normally do to get a site off the ground has already been done. You can establish best practices and consistency in your site templates. Industry-specific sites, so medical offices, schools, SaaS, any business that you want to build a site for, you can build a site template and sell that, target that vertical. A premium theme company is a good use case for a site template. That's what we're doing. And then also something that I don't think many people think of, but sharing content between developers is a good way. So you could do a site template, but also I've done this with Mike before, where I've built a bunch of entities, uploaded a bunch of files, configured it, and then used it for default content. And then I need to share it with him, but he has his own installation. So I just ship him a recipe with all that default content and config. He installs it and he has it on his laptop too. So just another use case.
That's a question. So with that, do you install this? If you're installing this on top of an existing site,
but the recipe?
Are you doing recipes or are you doing a full site template?
What for this use case?
Yes.
It could be both.
Oh.
So this, if it was a full site template, it would probably be more along the lines of the agency starter thing. But this is just recipes and site templates, they're kind of the same thing. The site template has a lot more config. But yeah, I mean, mostly this would be more just a single recipe.
Thanks.
Yeah. So how do you build a site template? So yeah, CMS2 is probably the easiest way. Install it, build your site, configure all your content types, all your site settings, all that stuff, and then run site export in Drush. And this is a tool that comes with Drupal CMS Helper. So if you don't use Drupal CMS to build all this, you can go straight to this, and actually there's what is it called? It's a site template based, but it's called a starter kit. And so with these dependencies, you can run site export, and it basically gives you an entire site template. And so one example of this, Mike built, on Drupal core, he built a demo of one of our themes, but then we needed to make it a site template. So we used these utilities because we weren't using CMS, basically set up Drupal with the demo content he had created, added these dependencies, ran site export, and then now we have, what I'll show you later is an install that just pops right into CMS. So if you want more control and you don't want to build a one-off site template that has everything in one package, you can define the recipes from the bottom up. And this is kind of how we've done our recipes that come with our themes. So right now we have 3 themes. And in those themes, we support Layout Builder, we support Drupal Canvas, and we support demo content. So all the themes kind of extend a base library of recipes that, depending on the theme and the options you enable, will invoke those recipes to give you your experience. And so to do that, we start with common entity field storage definitions. So if you're familiar with how Drupal works, it has a field storage, which basically defines the field, how it's stored in the database, and then there's a field instance, which is how it is attached to a node type. So of that, if you start with, like for our example, we started with the field storage definitions. So we have a bunch of block fields that map to our single directory components. So we started with those and put those in a recipe by itself. And then other recipes can extend those because there may be like 3 or 4 different block type recipes that we install that depend on one of those fields. And instead of putting that config in every single recipe, it just pulls from that. And I'll show you an example of what that looks like in VS Code. And then from there, like your entity bundles and field instances, so another recipe that would extend the first one that defines like, so your block type and the fields in that block and the view modes and the form modes and all that stuff. Those could go in another recipe that extend the first one. And then from there, you can have things like, this would kind of be default content. Like, so for our example, we ship like a full menu with our themes. So you might have a recipe for just the menu items. And then your full demo content and Canvas pages. So I know that's kind of vague right now, but we'll look at some actual examples. So if I go into what our recipes look like, let's see, let me zoom this in. Can everybody see that okay? So this is what I'm talking about. So the field storage definitions for our recipe, and I'm going to use block as an example. So when we launched, Canvas wasn't ready, so we had to support Layout Builder. And that meant that we had to build block types for every single directory component that we ship. And to do that, there's a bunch of block recipes you'll see here, logo item, media, menu card, all of these basically map to one of our single directory components. And if you don't know what a single directory component is, it's a way in a theme to have your HTML, your CSS, and your JavaScript basically in a single component folder that when it's invoked, Drupal will know to bring in the CSS for it and the HTML or Twig and JavaScript. And it's just a way to keep your design system organized. So yeah, going back to title CTA, that maps to our title CTA component. Each one of those block recipes extends this field block. And so you'll see I have all these common DripYard fields that are used across. So CTA obviously is used in our title CTA block, but we have other CTAs that also uses this. So kind of abstracting that field storage to this single recipe keeps things clean, because otherwise I would have this field storage duplicated in a bunch of different recipes that don't need it. So if I'll actually go into that title CTA so we can see how that extends. So if we look at okay, so these are basically the field instances. Let me scroll up a little bit here. So this extends the field storage. So this is specific to this block type. So the field storage that we talked about before can be used on any block, but these are the definitions that are specific to this particular block type. I know this is a lot of dense material here, but does anybody have questions about where I'm going with this, or is it clear as mud at this point? Mostly? Cool. So let me show you what this looks like in practice, because I think that will help. So I'm going to just install Drupal core by itself, and these commands are just shortcuts to get a site. If you install Drupal and walked through the installation, you would see the same thing. So right now, this is a vanilla Drupal site, okay? And so if I go into Appearance and go into our settings, I'm going to let somebody pick a theme: Great Lakes, Meridian, or Neonbyte.
Meridian.
Meridian, all right, perfect. So we're going to install and set as default, and go to Settings. And so here's this recipe builder that I've kind of built, and this is based on, our goal with DripYard is to be able to just download our theme and put it in your folder and be done. You don't have to compose or install or anything. You can, but we want it to be as seamless as possible. So these are the recipes that ship, and I'm actually going to enable Canvas real quick so we can see that. And these are currently, you can't see it on the screen, but these are disabled because we don't have Canvas yet. So I just installed Canvas. They should become available. And so this is more of a visual representation of what we built, and hopefully this will help kind of make sense. So I've got our blocks, nodes, demo content, our landing pages, which are based on Layout Builder, a Layout Builder demo, a Canvas demo, and Canvas patterns. And you obviously wouldn't want to install everything because you might actually use Layout Builder and Canvas in the same site, but for the demo content example, you probably don't want to do that. So when I enable this, you'll see everything else checked because it inherits. So we have the option to just select one or two, but if you get to one that inherits the other ones, it'll automatically do that. And this is just using form states. Recipes don't give you this interface out of the box. You can build it, but it shows kind of how the inheritance of the recipe works. So I'm going to install the Canvas demo, and this is going to install those. So the field definitions, this will actually install the block definitions as well, because even though we're not using Layout Builder in this example, we still want to have those blocks available for site building outside of Canvas. So if I go into block types, you'll see these are all the things that I talked about. So this is, I'll go to the title CTA, since that was the example I used. And if I go into manage fields, these are the fields that were brought in from the recipe, the form display. So all of this stuff is packaged in the recipe that's associated with the title CTA. And if I had a site that didn't need title CTA, then I could just omit it. So by stacking them in this way, you have that flexibility. And if I go to the home page, you'll see we start off with a basic empty Drupal site, but now we have like all of our default content. We've got Canvas pages, which can be bundled in recipes. So it's pretty amazing that you can just do this with one thing, one site template, one recipe. So you could, we recommend you take this and look at best practices for how we build our how we build our Canvas pages with single directory components. But you could use this and just change the content out and give it to a client, but you'd probably want to start fresh and just install the recipes that give you everything but the demo content. And that's this whole architecture of stacked recipes allows us to do that as well. So let's take a look at CMS and what that looks like. So I'm going to do the same thing and go over, let me find it. Okay. So I think some of you all said you hadn't used or seen CMS. This is what you get. It's super awesome, clean design for the installation. It's not all that blocky stuff that we're used to going through the Drupal install profile. And if you have a site template that's built with the tools that I mentioned and you put it in your recipes folder, it automatically shows up here. So here you'll see Meridian again. This is the vanilla starter one that comes with CMS, as well as the open source Byte that's kind of geared towards a SaaS product. So if we select Meridian,
Andy, sorry, I might have missed it. What is the specific thing you did that got a recipe to show up?
Here?
Yeah.
Yep, so all you have to do is create the site template with those tools that I mentioned. It's, I'll just show these again. So Drupal CMS Helper and Drupal CMS Template Base. So if you have CMS, you don't need these, they're already included.
There's something like the YAML line somewhere that's included in the installer maybe? Or...
Not even. No, so once you have these tools and you run this command, you have a recipe. Yeah. Or you have a site template that is a recipe. All you have to do at that point is to put it in your recipes folder. So I'm just going to go into CMS, if I can find it, CMS recipes. And so this is what you get when you download CMS. So there's Byte, and it knows that it's a site template, so it's going to include it in the installer. And then we have Meridian. So these other ones that are in here aren't site templates, they're just recipes that the site template extends, and they just happen to be in the recipes directory. But if you have, let me see, I think if we open this up, there should be something that defines it. Type site, I believe. I'm not sure if that's.
I think that's it, yeah.
That is it. Okay. So yeah, if you have a recipe and it's defined as type site, then, and you put it in that folder, then you get this by default.
Thank you.
Yeah. We shouldn't have picked Meridian for the first demo because we're going to get it again. But it's fine. But this is Meridian on CMS. So what you saw before was just Drupal core. And then this, is the full CMS stack. So there we go. Actually, what am I thinking? This is Mike's Meridian. Have you seen this before?
No, I have not seen the site template.
Yeah.
And he was up like working late last night.
And the night before.
And this morning.
Yeah, so a lot of this is, it's rough around the edges. A lot of things to like fall, a lot of traps to fall into to get to this point, but it's getting smoother. And it's with those two CMS modules and stuff like this stuff's becoming more accessible and approachable. Like I think at this point you all would be fine starting to create that. But yeah, this is the example where Mike built this in just Drupal core and built all the Canvas pages for the site, and then gave me a SQL dump and some files, and then I ran those tools and created it, and now it can be installed on CMS. So yeah, at this point, like, do you guys have any questions where we are? I mean, I think I've gone through most of it. Yeah.
So site export is going to make a recipe for your entire site as it exists.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is there also a site export kind of thing for I only want this node type, or I only want this menu setup, or I only want to do the more modular stuff?
I don't think so. That's a good question because.
So when you want to make those more modular recipes, how do you do that? Do you do a full site export and then you carve it up, or are you writing it manually?
There's a couple different approaches I've used personally. Most of it is build it out and then export it to config, and then pull it into a recipe, which is a huge pain.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Is there any documentation around how to do that anywhere?
There is out there, but I can't point you to it right off the top.
Yeah, that'd be a good thing to have in my presentation. I don't know because I haven't used those tools, and I've asked people like, hey, how can we do this? Like Features had the user interface where you could go in and check stuff. Like something like that would be awesome.
Sure.
And I know people probably have made something like it. I know like Adam that does CMS, his priority has been like the full site export. Yeah, and that's what our session in Chicago, we're actually pairing to do a session together. His is going to be the site export, and then mine's going to be more the what you're talking about. So maybe I need to find some tools before then. But let's look at site export. Oh wait, let's see. If I could remember how it goes. There we go. So yeah, the only argument that you can pass to this is destination. So it would not be the tool for the job for like creating those. So as I mentioned, when I created those, I started off like building it in the UI and then just exporting it to config and then copying it over. And the problem with that is like when you export it to config, there's like UUIDs and some other stuff that gets in there that you don't necessarily want in your recipe. So if we look at, let's see if I have a config directory. So we'll go back to that title CTA thing. If it's, yeah, okay. So this is what, if I ran config export, this is what I'd get.
Right.
Okay, and I don't want this first line, but I want the rest of it. Actually, I don't want this line either. So to create a recipe with this item, you would export it and then just remove those lines 1, 5, and 6 and put that in your recipe, and then you have it. Like, so kind of a pain, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but so the other thing that I've been doing is, because it's 2026 and we all use AI for everything, is when you build a recipe, like if we go into our base recipe, so I could basically I could build this hero recipe, and I could point AI at it and say, here's how a recipe is structured, create all the configuration for another block type that has this field. And it really does a pretty good job of creating an entire new recipe based on your definition, how you explain it. The huge caveat with that is in some recipes or in some like default content, you actually have to have UUID. So if we look at, and can everybody see this from there?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we look at default content, demo content, let's see. Let's go into the, demo content. So if we let's look at a file, for example. So I have, which one is the hero? Okay. So we have this hero over here on one of our demos. And here is the definition for that default content. So for a file, you have an image, and then you have the entity definition. And in here, you actually want a UUID because this represents like an actual item in your database. And so this needs to be unique, and it needs to be able to be installed on any site, and have the relationships, because typically you have in Drupal you have a file. And then you have media that wraps that file. And so you have, if we go into our media, you'll see I have a hero, which basically wraps to, where's hero one? Anyways, so the media wraps it. But so depends, this is key, right? So this UUID has to match what you have in your file. And a lot of that is managed manually, but if you're using AI to do this, it will try to generate a UUID, and AI is not mathematical. It'll just like put out whatever it thinks looks good, and then you'll be like, what? No, this is not a UUID. It looks like one, but it won't install, So if you're using AI to create any of these recipes, I recommend that you, like in your instructions, say anytime a UUID is needed, like use a PHP function to generate it, and then map it to the file. So for default content, there is a tool, content export, that's in 11.3. So this is super helpful if you want to do a recipe.
Up key because it's just off the screen.
You see it all right? It's off the side too. Let's see. All right, let's try this again. You see that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll zoom in a little bit. So is everybody familiar with Drush? I hate to like just show a bunch of commands. But anyway, so Drush content export, these are the things that you can do with it. So when you're creating a recipe and you want your default content and you don't want the entire site, this is how you do it. So content export, the node type or the entity type and the identifier. And so
the content export is just part of core?
It's part of 11.3. Yeah, so there was a default content module. And that's actually what we started with, because 11.3 I don't think was out like when we started building all this stuff. But now it is in core. And there are some things like you can export all of your media and it will like do the file and the media and like all the relationships with dependencies, right? So recursively export all the entities. So this tool is like the meta of the site export. If you just want like one node, or if you want all of your nodes.
But exporting this is content only. It won't bring along like the config.
Correct.
Content
This is content only.
or-
Yeah. So there I do feel like there is a gap for like,
Yeah.
and maybe you can do it with content export and point it at, or config export in some way that I'm not aware of. I'd love to know. Because it is a pain to build at this point.
So what about site export? For me, on 11.2 maybe, it says that command doesn't exist. Is that,
Yep, that's part of, let me show this again. Shoot, where am I? There it is. This is the hot slab, because I keep going back to it. CMS helper is what gives you that. Yeah. And if you're creating a site template, again, start with this, because this is like a starter kit for creating site templates. So yeah. Where are we on time here? So got a little time. Any other questions, or I can like poke around and we can try to mess with something? Yeah.
So I'm working on building Drupal CRM,
Sure.
right, which is designed to be something that other people build opinionated CRMs on top of, right, in the community. And so site template seems like an obvious sort of direction to take, because there's a whole bunch of content and configuration that is not necessarily appropriate to ship with sort of the base module.
Right.
Because it might make sense in some use cases and not
Sure.
others.
Yeah.
Do you have any insight or ideas about how to structure, let's say, kind of a hierarchy,
Yeah.
recipes, with that example?
Yeah. So let's look at one other thing that I forgot to mention. So it's called Saplings.
Yeah.
So Canopy is a Drupal agency, and they have this project Saplings, which was kind of one of the earliest examples that came out with recipes of how to build like a site package where you don't want everything on every site. And so this is a really good example. This is basically like the same approach I was showing earlier, where they've got base fields and things of that nature, in a single recipe, and then they're extending it with content types, and there may be like a blog content type, or there may be like they have paragraphs. So like you could install all this stuff up to this point and not install paragraphs. So in your example, like you could have a feature, like I don't know if somebody were to be selling that product or CRM product, there may be like an add-on that gives you additional entities and logic and modules and stuff like that. So that could just be a recipe. And if somebody pays for that, you enable that recipe. And it's like you've got your whole site. Like you could even start with a site template with site export and then create additional recipes on top of that you kind of pick and choose to apply. So.
And then the other thing that's kind of rolling around in my head is I understand very well upgrade path, right, for modules. And recipes is not so much a thing, right?
Right.
So in the case of something that's like a contrib thing, and people are contributing back to it, there are going to be future releases, right? And there's sort of a desire to support existing sites.
For sure.
Are there any crutches, for lack of a better word, in the recipe universe to facilitate that for point-to-point upgrades between recipe versions?
There is no upgrade path for recipe. They're meant to be applied, and then once they're applied, your config takes over on the individual site. So as you make changes in the recipe, as you're building the site, that config is king.
And you can reapply recipe. So, like you said, like they're not meant to be installed; they're meant to be applied. Recipes do ship with the composer.json, so obviously, if there's like dependencies from a module, those would be updated. Because when you install a recipe, there is like a composer unpack feature, which will take whatever recipe you're installing, the dependencies in its composer.json, and merge it into yours. And then, at that point, the code's still getting updated with your releases. But if you have a config update, you would most likely, if you have just like a single recipe for a feature, you would update that recipe and have it reapplied. And because like that strict property I show is like strict false, because that's set, it will skip anything that already exists and then just apply the new stuff.
Yeah, so the key on upgrade stuff, you need to update somebody that has the recipe, is to write that type of thing in a config action with the new
Right.
recipe.
Yeah.
Some config actions will override what's already there, and some won't. You just have to kind of play through that.
Yeah, and we can look at a config action. I didn't go too deep into that because it's like,
There's a lot.
yeah, it's a lot there. I mean, I'll just pull one up real quick so we can see what one looks like. So this is a pretty simple example. So config action is basically like calling a function with YAML, if you want to think of it that way. Simple config update is an action that is available. So there's a list of actions in the documentation for core that you can look up. Simple config action basically just allows you to apply a config to an existing site. So that could be an example of how you roll your update. It could be that, and this one is just updating social media links in the invite settings. There's some more example or more like detailed ones. So for example, place block in default theme, like it looks like a function name, right? And that's essentially what it's doing. It takes this and there's like an expected config that you pass to it, and then this would just place our address in the footer, in the right region of the footer.
The text you have in line 19, is that something that you
No,
created, or
this is core.
That's a core.
Yeah, it's a core, it's part of recipes. So you, that's a good thing to look up, but like there's, in the documentation, there are defined config actions and then what they expect to be passed.
So line 18 is the config entity that you're doing the action on.
Exactly.
19 is the action you're doing.
Yep,
And then 20 down to 28 is the values you want.
exactly.
Okay.
Yep. That's it. Anything else?
So, with that, why would you do that one for config action versus just having like the config in the recipe?
In the recipe.
And it would just apply that config, right?
Correct.
Okay.
This one, because it's part of demo content, so it actually has content. So this block, this address that we're placing, if I go in, here's the demo content. It's part of the recipe, and it's not available when the recipe's installed. It has to install the content, or it has to like create the default
So
content.
it's just a order of operations.
Order of
because
operations.
Of default content.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. That's it. Anything else? No? All right. Short and sweet.